God, grant us the serenity to accept the things we cannot change, the courage to change the things we can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Okay, or I'll just step away. Welcome to the 18th Annual Waves of Sobriety Roundup. And all of our technical problems today that we have are welcome. We have solutions for those too, I'm sure. First, we have a couple housekeeping announcements. Smoking permitted outside the building only. Checkout time. If you're staying at the hotel, checkout time is 11 a.m. And please be prepared for the Sunday morning wrap-up meeting. Make sure you're vacated your hotel room beforehand. Welcome. You can set your timer if you want.
Okay. David, alcoholic. Thank you guys for having me. Yeah, under that picture of Milton Hershey, there's also there's a quote, and the quote said, "Let us not forget how this all began." And I just thought it was really powerful. Me and Bill sat there for a little bit. And, people in my medical school class think I'm weird because I talk about Milton Hershey so much. Way more than I talk about some of the material that we're learning. But I just thought he was a really good guy. So I am going to start with a prayer. And this is the prayer of Thomas Merton. My Lord God, I have no idea where I am going. I do not see the road ahead of me. I cannot know for certain where it will end. Nor do I really know myself. And the fact that I think I am following your will does not mean that I am actually doing so. But I believe that the desire to please you does in fact please you. And I hope that I have that desire in all that I am doing. I hope that I will never do anything apart from that desire. And I know that if I do this, you will lead me by the right road, even though I may know nothing about it. Therefore, I will trust in you always, even when I may seem to be lost and in the shadow of death. I will not fear, for you are ever with me, and you will never leave me to face my perils alone. I really like that prayer because I originally found Thomas Merton. I was on a spiritual retreat during a spring break when I was in college, and my spring breaks in college didn't always look like taking spiritual retreats, but I got sober and a lot changed, and I'd gone down to North Carolina and stayed at this monastery and basically hung out with the monks for a week and didn't take my phone with me and didn't really talk to anybody and did a lot of just silent retreating, and came across Thomas Merton, came across that prayer. Came across a lot of his literature that I read that week, and ever since I read the prayer, it's really just stuck with me, and it's really just my go-to prayer, right? I say it when I'm struggling, I say it when I'm not struggling, and I just love the way that it's constructed, right? Like the first line of the prayer, God, I have no idea where I'm going. I think that if you are having trouble with your prayer routine, or you're having trouble thinking of the words when you're in a rut, or when you just are talking to God, or maybe when you're praying before you go to bed, I think the best way to go about a prayer is that first line right there. I don't know where I'm going. I need help. I need guidance. Just the humility in that sentence, I think, is what speaks to me the most. And that's why I really loved Merton, because he was a very humble guy, and he threw away his life. He sacrificed his life basically to live the lifestyle of a monk. And if you read a lot of his literature, it's under the same. It's constructed the same way that prayer is, and it's very humbling, and it's very it's just very powerful. So I wanted to start with that. But usually I do start with a different story, which I'm still going to tell this story because I tell it most times that I start speaking, and it's really not even that good of a story. But what I like about this story is that it really sets me up for what I want to talk about, and it just it just reminds me of what's really important here. So anyway, I was at a meeting in Philly, and it's not even my story. I was at a meeting, and I heard somebody sharing this story, and basically they were sharing that they were at a meeting down in Florida at this clubhouse, and this clubhouse has meetings all day, and a lot of people in and out of this meeting, maybe like 4 or 5 meetings a day, right? A lot of Seventh Tradition money getting collected at this meeting. And at this one particular meeting, the secretary gets up in front of the room and announces to the meeting that they've been robbed the previous night before. And basically, like, she went in the back closet because she had just counted the money, the Seventh Tradition money, the night prior, and this was the first meeting of the next day. And she goes back in the closet to look for the money, and she notices that, like, a lot of the money's gone, and the closet's like a mess, and it looks like somebody had broken in. And as you can imagine, like, this girl's talking about it in front of a room of alcoholics and, like, explaining the situation, and the alcoholics immediately start getting super, like, resentful, and chaos breaks out, and they're saying, "Oh, I think I know who did it." And while, like, chaos is breaking out in this room, right, like, in the back corner of the room, there's, like, an old-timer who's just sitting there, and the old-timer's calm, cool, and collected, and, not contributing to any of the chaos. And you must have been, like, there must have just been, like, some spiritual fumes coming off of this guy that's, like, dampening the chaos in the room, and he begins to, like, gently, like, raise his hand in the air, and people just, like, the spiritual fitness that's, like, radiating off this guy, like, kind of just, like, dampens all the chaos, and everybody, like, slowly turns their head to look at him. And he probably never really says much, but he's gonna say something, and the secretary in the front of the room calls on him because he's got his hand up, and the old timer goes, did you count the big books? And the secretary's confused, and she's like, "What do you mean, did I count No, I didn't count the big books, but I counted the money, and then I came back this morning, and there wasn't a lot of there's money missing." And he's like, "You didn't count the big books? Like, were there any big books missing?" And she's like, "No, like, I don't think they touched the big books. Like, they didn't look like they were, they looked like they were all there from what I remember yesterday." And he's like, "So then what's the problem? Because the big books are really the only thing that matters." So I learned 2 things from that story. The first thing I learned is obviously focus on what matters, and that can be very hard in sobriety, especially when you put together a couple years of sobriety. I think a common mistake that some people make is that our life gets really big when we start letting sobriety iterate, and life gets really good, and you get the job, you get the money, you get the career, you get the significant other, you get the family, you get the connections, and sobriety starts going down the wayside. It's very easy to forget that this needs to be kept number one under any and all circumstances. And when I hear that story and when I tell that story, it's just really, like, reminds me and keeps it real and keeps it super clear that I need to focus on what's important. And the second thing that I learned from that story is that if I'm ever secretary at a meeting, I'm hiding all the Seventh Tradition money in the big books because I know they're not looking there. There's also a quote by I'm a big, like, quote person. I read a lot of motivating stuff, and I'm a big quote person. There's a quote by Einstein that kind of also correlates to this story as well. And Einstein says that the important thing is to keep the important thing the important thing. And I think that if you're an alcoholic and you're coming to AA and you're a newcomer, I think that if you can understand what the important thing is and you can keep that important thing the important thing, I think that you'll have a beautiful experience in these rooms. My friend Bill always likes to talk about miracles. And I believe that we're all in the midst of a miracle here. I know a lot of people in this room personally can relate to the feeling of unbelievableness on some mornings when we wake up a sober individual and we recollect on our past and we recollect where we've been and the amount of pain that we've experienced. Because at baseline, right, with the way I think, I would still be out on the streets, or maybe I would be dead, or I definitely wouldn't be here, right? I definitely wouldn't have the friends that I have today. I definitely wouldn't be a medical student, like, not a shot. right? Because at baseline, like, I drink and I drug, and even when I tell myself that I'm not going to, I continue to wake up and do it. So I believe that I'm in the midst of a miracle, and it's really a unbelievable feeling. And Bill kind of talked about medical school a little bit. I was driving down here, right, because Hershey's like 3 hours, and I'm just thinking in the car, I'm like, I'm not medical school material. Like, my SAT scores were like borderline learning disability. I sat in the back. If I went, like, in high school, I was in the back of the class. I wasn't paying attention. When I got to college, you'd be lucky to see me in class. I was never the sharpest tool in the toolbox, but all this is like a result of coming to Alcoholics Anonymous and simply just taking what I learned at Alcoholics Anonymous and applying it to another entity. Another thing in my life that I've come to fall in love with is running. I've run 50-mile races, I've run 60-mile races, I've run a couple 100-mile races. I've ran 50 miles across the Grand Canyon, and I've been able to do all these amazing things and really, like, explore these amazing things that, like, I never would have really understood. Like, I never would have known that I even liked doing if it wasn't for this program. Some other things that I've gotten from this program are in, like, super deep friendships and these strong connections that I've never been able to find anywhere else other than these rooms. And I'll just tell a story real quick about this guy sitting next to me. It was about a year ago today. I was in Ohio, and I was running a 100-mile race, and I was around, like, mile 80. I started really hurting, and it was like kind of weather like it is right now. It was cold. I think it was like I was on mile 80, and it was around like 11 at night, and it's dark. And I was running it with a buddy, but my buddy was only running 50 miles, so he was already done. So I'm kind of just like sitting out there, like, suffering alone, like, still have 20 miles to go, and it just like seems like so, like, that's just going to take me like 5, maybe 6 hours, and it just seems like so far and so much. So my first instinct is I'm going to call Bill Lombard, and I call Bill Lombard, and the first thing I say is, like, Bill, I need you to, he knows I'm, like, going to do this because he knows, like, I'm a crazy person. So he picks up the phone. I'm like, Bill, I need you to tell me to keep going. And Bill's response to me was, David, I'm not hanging up the phone with you until you cross the finish line. I called this man at 11 p.m. I didn't hang up with him until 4:30 in the morning when I finished running, like, about 101 miles. And he talked me through every step. He talked me through every breath. He told me what I needed to hear. And he refused to hang up the phone, even though I told him, I'm pretty sure I'm going to finish. We can stop talking now. But and then he made me FaceTime him when I was crossing the finish line, so he could see my face when I crossed the finish line. And there was also a point too where I'm pretty sure he put on his running shoes and started running around Ocean City. I'm running in Ohio, so we're both, it's like 3 a.m. He's running around his house in Ocean City. I'm running circles in Ohio. We're both running at the same time, and he's talking me through it. But that's special, right? I mean, that's, he's a 3 a.m. friend, or not 3 a.m. He's a one-ring friend, right? I call him, he picks up on one ring. It's like he's got, like, a small army, like, answering his phone calls. And, like, you don't get that anywhere else. At least, I don't know. I don't get that anywhere else. I only get that here. And the most pertinent thing that I've gotten from this program, which is probably just has been the most useful for me, is the mental aspect, the mental freedom aspect, not being chained to a drink, and being able to wake up every day and live a life full of purpose and be a competent individual and a responsible individual and a sober son, a sober brother, a sober friend. I came in here and I struggled with a lot of things that I thought were mental disabilities. I had a lot of anxiety. I had a lot of depression. I would never be doing this 5 years ago. I wouldn't be capable of speaking in front of a ton of people. And it's been my experience that if you're in here and you struggle with those kinds of things, a lot of it comes down to the underlying crux of the problem, which in most of our cases is alcoholism. And when you begin to start fixing the spiritual malady, like the book says, we tend to straighten out in most other ways. So a lot of the things that I struggled with when I first came in here, anxiety, depression, I was meeting with psychiatrists. I was on taking handfuls of psychiatric medicine every day. And that wasn't really my problem, right? Like, my problem was that I was an alcoholic, and I had this undiagnosed and untreated disease, which manifests as a spiritual malady. That was the main thing that I needed to fix. So, yeah, this program has literally given me everything. I would not be where I am today without this program. And yeah, that's why it's an honor to come down here and speak to you all. But I'm going to go through my story a little bit and yeah, try to stay on time here. But I got sober on the 22nd of April in 2019. God willing, I'll have 6 years of sobriety this upcoming April. I grew up in Ocean City. And growing up, as I look back, I feel like I was a very extreme thinker. There were certain things about me that if I thought about something and I really liked something, I wanted to always do it to the fullest extent. This was existing within me before I even picked up a drink at all. I'll just give a few examples. When I was in high school, I got really into skateboarding, and I liked skateboarding so much that me and all my friends skated, and I liked skateboarding so much that I decided to build this 12 by 24 foot half pipe in my backyard because I liked it so much. Another example is when I was in high school, I got really into making music and recording music, and again, I liked it so much that I decided to build a customizable walk-in recording studio with a door, and you shut the door behind you and it's soundproof, and there's wires that come out the top to a desk outside of the box where you can mix and master everything. Everything I did was very much all in. And I used to get mad because people would see that about me, and I noticed it, but I didn't really know that it would turn into a problem. But people would always call why are you so obsessed with that? Why can't you just take it or leave it? Why do you have to be all consumed by something? And it would honestly really offend me because I didn't really see I knew that I was like that, but I didn't really think it was a negative thing. But the word obsession has such a negative connotation to it, right? And I think it's mentioned a lot in the book. I believe it's mentioned more than 20 times within the first 160 pages. But people would tell me that, and I would just get very upset because I was just why am I like that? Why don't I know when to stop, right? And this is before I even touched a drink. But as you can imagine, when I did come across a drink and, I was in that position to drink with some of my buddies in high school, I, quickly realized that I liked it. I quickly realized that, it allowed me to optimize things it allowed me to optimize my social standing. It allowed me to optimize my happiness. It allowed me to optimize my friendships. It allowed me to feel good about myself and fix things within me that I felt like I was lacking as a person. And before you know it, it was I was doing the same thing I was doing with skateboarding, the same thing I was doing with music, and I was just doing that just doing it with alcohol. And it quickly spun out of control very quickly. And I don't want to really get into all the war stories because I'm really trying to stay on the solution side of things. But just to qualify a little bit, I guess, waking up in psychiatric wards was not uncommon for me. I was in and out of a lot of rehabs, probably every rehab within a 20-mile radius of my house I was in and out of. Again, like I said, I was seeing psychiatrists on handfuls of psychiatric medicine because people thought there were things wrong with me. I was trying to kill myself, hated who I was. I dropped out of college. Mom looking me in the eyes crying, sister looking me in the eyes crying, please get on the plane, go back to rehab. I can't get on the plane, Mom. I can't go back to rehab. I need to do this. just total lack of control. And the other important thing too that I'll say in terms of like qualifying is I remember because I would end up in these psych wards and I would end up in these detoxes, right? And I would be like a couple days removed from the drink, and maybe a week removed from the drink, right? And I'd be at these places with these other people that are in rehab, and they're removed from the drink too. But the thing was, like, when I got removed from the drink for like 7-ish days, like, I started getting worse. And I remember like being in these facilities and like, you have a roommate usually in these facilities, and you get kind of tight with your roommate. And like, I just remember like most of my roommates, they would be 7 days removed from the drink and they would start getting better. Like, it seemed like they were getting better and like more like competent and more like clear and stable. And like, I was always like getting worse, and it really like started to freak me out, because I was just like, wow, like something must be really, really wrong here. But it makes a lot of sense when you read the book, and I think it's on page 64, because it says that on the bottom of the first paragraph on page 64, it says that our liquor was but a symptom, so we had to get down to the causes and the conditions. So really, like, what we're dealing with, what I was dealing with was a disease that's centered in my mind, and drinking was but a symptom. So it makes sense that when the drink was removed from me, I started feeling a lot worse. And I think that was one of the things too that I reflect back on that like really convinced me, talking about step one, that really showed me that like, okay, like this is like a serious thing, and like this isn't me just like in a phase. Like, this is me, like I might actually have a problem, right? Okay, so I was in and out of rehab a lot, and I want to talk about this last time around, which is about 5.5 years ago. I think I had like woken up in a psychiatric ward, and at this point I was like, nobody was giving me any time of day. I was like just a tornado in everybody's life, and I had an option to either get dropped off at the Atlantic City homeless shelter, or I could go on a plane and go back down to Florida for another time and try to do rehab again. And at the time it was a very hard decision, but I did end up getting on the plane and going back down to Florida. And there were a couple things that were very different about this experience when I went back down to rehab, because I got on the plane and I had no intention of staying sober. So my journey started when I was in that rehab, and it was because of what the experiences I had in the rehab and the people that I met in the rehab, and the way that things were kind of laid out, that like really ended up like catapulting me on this journey. And that's what I want to talk about, because again, going back to my story in the beginning, I think it's very important. So what happened was, I get to this rehab. Usually when I go to rehab, I don't know, there's like a 50-50 shot that there's going to be young people there. And at this rehab, there was a group of young people there. Now, unfortunately for me, this group of young people that were there, they were very excited about AA. And that just kind of weirded me out, because I didn't understand how anybody could be excited about this, because it made me the opposite of excited. But unfortunately, I didn't really have a choice when I went to this rehab, because it was either like I hang out with these people or I like hang out with people that are a lot older than me. So I was just kind of like forced by necessity to hang out with these people that were like super just excited about AA all the time. And like, so what does excited about AA mean in rehab, right? Like waiting for the clock to hit 5 p.m. so that we could all hop in the rehab van and go to a meeting. Excited to like pick out who's going to sponsor them. Excited to like pick up a white chip or pick up a 30-day chip. These group of guys were just, I don't know. It was just something about like the way that they talked about it, and it was something about like the realness of their enthusiasm that like really stuck out to me. And I think at the time, like what really like made me like listen and kind of like take some of that on myself was that like I just wanted to feel something real. Like I felt like when I was in active addiction, I wasn't feeling anything that was real, right? I was putting these chemicals in my body that was like, giving me like a sort of stimulus that was just all fake, right? Like it made me feel a certain way, but it was fake. And when I was in this rehab and I was with this group of guys, like, I just, like, what they talked about and their feelings about it, and, like, the way that, like, they saw AA and the way they saw the world as a result of that was just, like, it was, like, a real feeling, and I wanted to feel that, and that's all I needed, and that kind of, like, lit a flame in me that, you know, when it didn't, like, it wasn't just all good after that, right? Like, I had just become, like, a little bit open-minded. Like, I was more open-minded to, like, trusting in people, and I was more open-minded in going to meetings, and I was open-minded to getting a sponsor, and I was open-minded to going through the steps, and most importantly, I was open-minded to, like, not coming back home right after my rehab stay. And what ended up happening was I ended up staying at a sober living there after I had gotten out of the rehab, and stayed at the sober living, and eventually somehow got the opportunity to go to a structured sober living out in California on the West Coast, which was an opportunity that I ended up taking. And I don't know if anybody in here is familiar with what a structured sober living is, but basically it's a sober living with just, like, a ton of rules tacked on top of it, right? So, like, curfews, bedtimes, make your bed or you're writing an essay, clean up after yourself, just like a total, like, behavioral modification program that I went out to out west. And it was important for my sobriety, and it was also important because, like, I needed to know, like, how to become a competent individual. At the time, I was like 19 or 20 years old. I didn't know anything about being a responsible adult. So I needed to be, like, forced to go to bed at the same time every night, right? I needed to be, like, forced to wake up at a respectable time every morning. I needed to make my bed every morning. I needed to clean up after myself. And a big thing too about this house was that it was, like, super big on accountability, right? Like, everybody in the house held their roommates accountable. And when you start holding other people accountable that are your friends, you slowly start to learn how to hold yourself accountable. So all these, like, things about this house really started to, like, slowly change my life. And I'll tell a story too about this house. One morning, one of my first days there, if you've been in sober living, you know they basically just, like, pack a ton of people, like, in this small house, right? So we're all, like, sleeping in bunk beds, and I'm sleeping on the top bunk, and the top bunk sucks. And, you know, if you're the new person, you always got to sleep on the top bunk because everybody wants the bottom. And it's like it's got to be like 4 a.m, and my bunk bed starts to rattle because my roommate's getting up at 4 a.m. because my roommate's got to go work a 12-hour shift that day. And the thing about this house is that they're super big on keeping sobriety number one under any and all circumstance, right? So, like, even though my roommate's got to go work a long shift that day, if he wants to stay in the house, he's got to make sure that he gets to a meeting, or else he's not going to be able to stay there. So if that means that he has to sacrifice some of his sleep, and he has to wake up at 4 a.m. so he can go, you know, put on his jacket and get his bike and go bike down to the meeting that we all go to, then, like, that's what it is, you know? And I started seeing that in the house, and I started seeing, like, how serious a couple of the guys that I was living with were taking AA, and were taking, like, the small details in AA, like getting to a meeting, like praying on your knees, you know, like sponsorship, helping the new guys, like all these little things. Because, like, if you didn't do that in the house, like, you weren't allowed to live there. So if you wanted to graduate the house, you had to still hit a meet. Like, it didn't matter how big your life got, because we all know, like, you get a couple weeks under your belt, you get a couple months under your belt, stuff starts to come back into your life, like, rather quickly. Significant others, family, friends, job, all these things, and it's so easy for sobriety to go down to the wayside. But what this, like, house really taught me was that, you know, it's important to not let that happen. And I ended up meeting, like, a bunch of really great people there that have changed my life. I also met a lot of people there that have passed away, and, you know, that had a big impact on me as well, because, you know, it's just like, this is like a serious illness, right? Like, it's the only disease that tells you that you don't have a disease. And a lot of people, unfortunately, like, don't make it through. And I loved a lot of, like, great people out there that, I get a phone call like out of the blue, and then it's like, oh, so-and-so passed away. And it's just like the reality of the situation. But all these factors that I experienced out there were really like played a big role in keeping me on the course. So anyway, I'm out at this house and I do the whole year out there and I graduate this program and I'm feeling pretty good about myself. I got like a year sober and I start thinking about what I want to do. And, I'm thinking about going back to school, going back to college, because I had been in college and I dropped out, and I was a nursing major. I was trying to get a nursing degree just so I could be a nurse. And sobriety's weird because when you stop drinking, it's like the first like thing that comes to mind is like, how am I going to spend all my time? And especially when you're like 19 years old and you're doing it, it's just like, how am I going to like derive any happiness or meaning from the world if I can't like go out on my 21st birthday and go to the bar with all my friends, right? So it's just like a really like tough thing to kind of grapple with. And I think that the way that I grappled with it is I looked at it as like you have a clean slate of identity. So like it's very important like in those first couple days, weeks, and months to like really ask yourself like, who do you want to become? Like, where do you see yourself, especially if you're young? And what I did was, while I was out in LA and while, I went back to school, like I just tested out all these different identities, right? Like there was a while when I was in California and I was like, I just want to be the guy that stays sober and goes surfing with all my friends and like, works like a low-key job on the side and like I'm cool with that. I did that for a while and then I was like, no, like I think I need something more, right? So then I started like thinking and I was like, oh, well, maybe I want to like go back to college and try to do the nursing thing. So then I started like thinking about that and like tried that out, right? And just to kind of like sidetrack a little bit, I graduated this house and I decided to go back to college to try to go become a nurse. And that had its like whole list of like red flags because my whole entire sobriety support is in Los Angeles, California. I want to go back home so I can go to a university, like a college campus where there's, like a plentiful load of boozing and drugs. Like I want to go back there and I want to like try to like stay sober on a college campus and get my nursing degree. And I don't know a single person sober on the East Coast. So what ended up happening was I left LA, I got on a plane, I went back to college, I enrolled in the nursing degree program that I was previously in. So I went back to the same university that I was getting loaded at, basically. But what I ended up doing was I actually moved right into a new sober living that was right on my college campus, and it was another like very intense sober living, and it was pretty funny because I'm already like a year and probably like some change, like 2 months like sober at this point. I'm coming back to the East Coast to go to school. I don't know anybody that's sober. I'm moving into this new house, which is again like another super intense house. They have like a blackout period, so they take my phone when I first move in, and I can't leave the house unless I'm with an elder member in the house. Like basically like treating me like I just got out of detox. I'm over like a year sober, and I'm about to start going back to college, like take college classes, and I'm like, is there any way like around this? They're like, no, like this is just the rules of the house. You got to go through it. So it's so funny because like I'm in nursing school with like all my classmates and, I'm like getting all their numbers and I got to write their numbers down on like a piece of paper so that I can go back to the house and call them from the home phone later if I like needed any help with, my homework or anything. But and I'm making it sound like I like wanted to like check myself into another structured sober living. Like trust me when I say I did not want to do that, right? But I had a lot of like my family and I had a lot of my friends out west, and I knew for a fact that like if I didn't go there, like I was gonna get held accountable and I was gonna get my covers pulled and I was gonna be like my friends like aren't afraid to like hold me accountable, which I love. And if I didn't go to that sober living, I don't know if I would still be sober, to be honest, because I was in a very high risk environment on a college campus. So I ended up staying there for a little bit and doing the school thing, and basically like ended up moving it. Like I didn't finish out the whole program, but I got what I needed, right? Because the whole like point of that was that like sobriety was like number one, because I knew that like as long as I was in that place, as much as it sucked, as much as I thought I didn't need to be there, my sobriety was not at jeopardy. As long as I was there, I was meeting people, I was forced to go to meetings, I was forced to get a new sponsor. I was forced to go through the steps again. Like they didn't care. Like they didn't care that they knew I was in nursing school, but they didn't care. And honestly, like I didn't agree with it at the time, but looking back, I agree with it because at that time, like my sobriety and like me getting connected on the East Coast was well more important than my college GPA at the time, was well more important than like my experience in class, or whether or not my classmates thought I like was weird or not because like I don't have a cell phone. It just like that's like the kind of like sacrifice that like I think you have, like if you really want this thing, like if you're new and you really want this thing, like you have to be willing to throw a lot away so that you can keep sobriety, number one. Because if you're an alcoholic, like a real alcoholic, you will find your way back to a drink if you're not like plugged in, constantly plugged in. So I knew that, like, especially on a college campus, I knew I had to be plugged in. And, you know, like I said, I didn't stay there the whole time. I stayed there until I got what I needed and I was plugged in, and, you know, I had meetings I could hit. I had people I could talk to. And then I moved out and moved in with some of my buddies from college that weren't sober, but they, you know, knew my deal and they were respectful of it. And, you know, I trusted them. And, you know, back to the whole identity thing, right? Like thinking about like the kind of person that you want to become. You're not drinking, so now what do you do? It's like I also went through a phase, and some people like don't agree with this, but I think it was like a phase that I kind of had to go through. I went through a phase where I wanted to like still be the guy that could drink water and Red Bull and like be the life of the party on the weekends, on Thursday, Friday, and Saturday nights. And, you know, I was at college and I felt that I was, you know, the book talks about a position of neutrality. I felt that I had enough like of a spiritual grounding to kind of like try that out. And I did try that out. And, you know, I went out on the weekends and, like, drank water, played flip cup with Red Bull, like, you know, talked to girls, like, kind of, like, stuff like that, like, I needed to, like, try that out because I thought that, like, that might be, like, who I wanted to be, right? And then I remember, like, one night I'm sitting up at my college apartment. It's, like, 4 a.m, and, like, me and my roommates are sitting on our couch in our living room, and we have some people over, and, I just remember sitting there and just being like, I have this gift of sobriety, and I just felt like I was wasting it because I was up until 4 a.m. I'm going to go to bed. I'm going to wake up in a couple hours, and, you know, I'm not going to be hungover when I wake up, but I'm basically going to be hungover when I wake up because I'm not treating my body right. I'm not getting the amount of sleep that I need, right? So, like, basically, like, this whole thing, like, transpired into me being like, you know what, I don't want to do that anymore. And then I canceled out that identity, right? And then I went to my next identity, and I was like, you know, I'm back in school. I'm really enjoying this. I'm sober. I'm having a totally different academic experience at college, right? Because when I was a freshman and sophomore at this university, teachers hated me, wasn't in class. GPA was, like, in the, like, 2.0 range, you know, like, just totally, like, there for one reason, and it wasn't academics. Then I come back over a year sober, right? I'm at the same institution, so I'm seeing, like, the same people. I'm seeing the same teachers. And, like, instead of, like, hating class and not even showing up to class, now I'm, like, sober. I'm sitting in the front row of class, and I'm, like, fired up on a Monday morning to, like, learn about biology. And, you know, instead of, like, my professors, like, hating me, now they're like, I'm scoring, like, better on tests, and I'm, like, taking everything more seriously. Now they're coming up to me after class like, hey, do you want to help me with this research project? Like, I have this idea in the lab. I really think that you would be, like, of use. Like, I think you should consider doing this with me. You know, and I'm just, like, loving, like, the contrast of it all, right? Like, instead of, like, you know, going out and getting loaded and staying up all, like, Thursday, Friday, and Saturday night, like, instead of doing that, like, now I'm in the library on Friday and Saturday nights and just, like, taking academics, like, super seriously, which was something that, like, I've never done, and I've never really been a good student. So it was just fun to, like, play with that contrast and play with the idea that, like, my life is just, like, a lot different now. And I was just like, it's just like it's weird to explain it, but I think, like, the best thing to explain it is, like, the contrast of it was very fun. And eventually, like, that led me to the idea of, like, you know what, I want to go try to, like, get into medical school. So I'm a junior. It's like my junior year in university, and I'm thinking, like, I want to go try to be a doctor, right? And there's, like, a lot of, like, red flags about this decision because I drop out of nursing school, right? And the last time I dropped out of nursing school, which was like my sophomore year, I was in a psych ward like the next morning. So my family's having like PTSD because I'm telling my family I'm like dropping out of nursing school, and they think I'm like getting loaded again, which, you know, is a reasonable thought, but I wasn't. The other thing I have going against me is that I'm not even like 2 years sober at this point, right? So like I'm still kind of like a liability. And the other thing I have going against me is, like I said earlier, like I've never been naturally intelligent. I've never been naturally sharp. My SAT scores are terrible. Like my GPA, like I have to make up for like my terrible GPA because I just didn't care about it when I was drinking. So like I have that going against me, right? And then, like, the other part of this process that was actually, like, really fun, really messed up, and also, like, but kind of, like, very relevant to this is, you know, I decided to do it. I'm like, because honestly, it's like I didn't get sober to, like, play it safe, right? Like, I got sober to, like, if I want to do something, like, I want to do it. I'm sober. Like, I gave up, like, all the other stuff, so, like, I have time to, like, focus on these goals. And I believed in myself at the time, and So I went for it, and I didn't really listen to what anybody said. I mean, I listened to like what my people in AA said, but like, you know, there was obviously people telling me not to do it. But I just felt like it was the right thing to do, and I felt like I wanted to do it, so I went for it. And I'm putting together my application to get into medical school, and you know, I had to do a lot of work. Like my GPA was terrible. I had to take this test called the MCAT. It's a long test. It's an 8-hour test. Like I don't usually take tests like that. I had to take it. I had to do well on it. And, you know, I'm putting together this application, and the application is full of essays, right? And why do I want to be a doctor? Well, I want to be a doctor because a lot of it has to do with my experience in AA. A lot of it has to do, like most of it has to do with my experience of, you know, helping people out in AA, helping the new guys. Like just my overall experience in this is like so relevant in terms of healthcare. And I think it makes a lot of sense for somebody to like come into AA, get sober, and like find like a passion, find that they really have a deep passion for helping other people out, and then like decide that like that's the reason they want to go into healthcare, or that's the reason they want to be a physician, or that's the reason they want to be a surgeon, right? And like, so I wrote about that on my application. I wrote all about my recovery. I wrote about like where I was at. I wrote about how I had like 4 or 5 years of recovery. I wrote about helping people. I wrote about Alcoholics Anonymous. I wrote about all of this. I basically spilled my heart in this application. And I was like, this is going to be different. This is going to be good. This is going to like get me in. Like I knew that like a lot of people like didn't have that experience. So, you know, despite my terrible my lower GPA, I thought that like it would be a good move, right? And I run it by somebody at my college because I'm like, you know, running it by people to like make sure it's perfect and edit it up. And the most important person that I had to run it by was my advisor at college because she helps all the pre-med students try to get into medical school. And I run it by her. She reads it. She doesn't know. Nobody at school knows anything about my sobriety because I'm just not open about it. So she's like reading this like essay and her like jaws dropping. She can't believe it. And then she looks at me. She finished reading it. She's like, "You can't say this." I'm like, "What? I can't say this? What do you mean? Like that's the reason I want to be a doctor." And she's like, "You can't talk about this on your medical school application. They're not going to let you in." And I was like, "What do you mean? Like I'm like 4 or 5 years sober. They're not going to let me in? Like they won't be able to understand that? Like it's a medical condition." And she's like, you will not get in. It's a red flag. If you want to be able to like, they're not going to let you basically write prescriptions and if you had a problem in the past. So dead serious. Like that was told to me. And so like, you know, I reconsider. Like my first instinct is like, you know, like whatever, I'm still going to say it. But then I start thinking about it and I'm like, you know, luckily I had a lot of other stuff that I could talk about on my application. And, you know, I did agree with her because unfortunately, like we all like, you know, have to deal with this stigma. And the stigma is still like very, very, very pertinent, like in a lot of ways. I know it's gotten better, but there's still like a lot of things. And it just sucks because like as alcoholics too, it's just like, sure, like we have our differences and sure, like maybe we're like a high liability, I don't know. But like the thing about us is that like feel everything very deeply, and we care about things that we care about very deeply, and we have this obsession complex in our head, right? And like I don't believe that like that's always a negative thing. Like I was obsessed with drinking, but like I'm still like obsessed more about, like I'm still obsessed right now. Like that obsession was never removed from me. It was just redirected towards something else, right? Like I still have things that like I very much care about, that I very much am like over the top about. And I believe that like that's really what separates us from normal people, is that we have this complex in our head that just allows us to completely pour ourselves into things that like we care about, that we feel is very important. And that's a very, very, very powerful thing to have. And I think that if you're doing the right things in AA and you're on your knees talking to God every night and you're in constant communication with alcoholics and you're coming to things like this, like I really, really believe that if you're doing the right things and your focus is aimed at serving others, like those characteristics that were once defects actually start to turn into assets. So it's a shame that, you know, a lot of the stigma is kind of like deterring us from like going to certain things. Whatever. So I change my application up, and I talk about a lot of different stuff, and eventually end up, you know, by the grace of God, getting into medical school. And yeah, I don't know. I just like anything is really like possible when you get sober. That's one thing that I like took out of this whole experience up until the point like that day I got into med school. It's just like I thought like coming in these rooms, like I thought this was like just about not drinking. Like I thought this was about like just staying sober till midnight. And I was like seriously wrong about that. This is about like falling in love with the person you are and like rediscovering who you are through a process of like breakdown that builds up like this like awesome spiritual foundation that gives you like the tools to like handle life, because life can be very difficult. And I just still will be at school and I'll just like look up at like there's like a big medical center, and like people come to like get care there and they trust that they're going to get the right care. And I just like, you know, it's just like a kind of unbelievable feeling sometimes to just like think that like, this was like never in the cards for me. Like I feel as though I'm living a life that like I'm very much like unqualified to live. And it's only because of Alcoholics Anonymous, and it's only because of like I got like an education about myself in these rooms. And when I learned like what I was really up against and what I was dealing with, and when I learned like what I had to do to like overcome a lot of the things that I was going to struggle with, I was able to like do whatever I wanted to do, even if I wasn't the most intelligent person, you know, even if I wasn't the most athletic person. Like if I wanted to do something, I knew that like the same effort that I applied to Alcoholics Anonymous, I just had to take those like main principles and like apply them elsewhere, and I knew that I could do it. And I was in the operating room the other day, like just shadowing one of the surgeons there, and he's a brain surgeon. And they let me scrub into the case, and basically what that means is you get all sterile, so you can be like right up next to the operating table as they're doing the surgery. I'm like right up next to the table. There's the surgeon there. There's the training resident there. And they're cutting this guy's head open, and they're placing in like a deep brain stimulator, which is for like Parkinson's and stuff. And basically, it's just like a probe that goes and inserts into the brain. And I'm sitting there like just observing the surgery, basically, because like that's something that you do as a student. Like you go and you shadow these surgeries, or shadow like different physicians, and kind of like get a feel for what you want to do. So I'm just sitting there and I'm like shadowing the surgery. I'm like totally blown away, and like in the middle of the surgery, the surgeon like turns and looks at me, and he like holds up like this small little thing that I make out to be like a tiny little screwdriver. And he asks me if I know what it is, and I'm like, is it a screwdriver? And he's like, yeah, like, do you know how to use it? And when he asked me that, I got like really nervous, because I felt like he was going to ask me to like assist with the case, and I didn't know if I was ready to do that. So it was pretty obvious that I was like in my head, and I didn't respond right away. So then he's like, you know, like lefty loosey, righty tighty. And I'm like, yeah, I know how a screwdriver works. He's like, all right, good, screw this in. So he gives me this screwdriver. I'm literally in this like guy's like head, and I'm screwing in a metal bolt to something, and I'm like, so nervous. My hands are shaking, whatever. But the reason I'm telling the story is because, like, again, like going back to talking about miracles, like I'm sitting there screwing this thing in, and I'm just thinking like, oh my gosh, like 5 years ago, this would have been like this life that we live, that we get to live, this second chance is just the most amazing, and like it's just like unbelievable to me sometimes, because like where my mind goes when this guy hands me the screwdriver, I'm just like, oh my God, like 5 years ago, like my mom wouldn't have even given me a dollar bill because like she knew where it was going. But now like I get handed this screwdriver, and I'm trusted enough, and I'm like, I come off enough as like a competent and responsible individual, which I never was before I stepped foot into AA. I mean, I was just causing damage everywhere, and like, yeah, I'm just like screwing this thing into this guy. I just can't believe it. And like my life is full of experiences like that today, full of experiences in different ways, like not even related to medicine, like running and family, and like being able to like be a good role model in my house, like for my siblings and the friends that I've made through this process. And it's just been amazing, and I've never been more excited about anything in my life, which is ironic because I used to get mad at people that got excited about this when I first came in, but now I'm the one that's excited about it. But I think that that's an important feat about this whole thing. I think it's important to stay enthusiastic, and Bill knows because Bill's the most enthusiastic guy I know. But like that kind of energy is contagious. Just like negativity is contagious, positivity is very contagious. And I make it a point to try my best. And it's like, honestly, I don't even need to try anymore because like this has given me back so much. It's like hard to not be excited about it. But I really like try to like, I'm not afraid to show people that I'm fired up about this thing, because it's changed my whole entire, it's changed who I am as a person. It's changed my family. It's changed absolutely everything about me in the best possible way. And I just think that it's very important to not be afraid to be passionate about these kinds of things, and not be afraid to be enthusiastic about what's to come, because I've never been more excited in my life to find out like what's down the road 5-10 years from now. Like a lot of the guys in AA that I hang out with, like they're really like into this idea of like what's going to happen if you like what happens if you just let sobriety like iterate, like what happens if you like remove this one, like how much can I get if I remove this one thing from my life, like how much different will my life be in a year from now, 2 years from now, a decade from now, 2 decades from now. It's like sobriety has this like ability, I feel like, to iterate and really turn your life into something beautiful as long as you like let it keep doing its thing. Last thing I want to touch on is there's a page in the book. Okay. There's a page in the book, page 45. I just want to end it on this because I feel like this is like, I don't know, it might be the most important thing in the book, in my opinion. But it says on page 45, first full paragraph on 45, it talks about, before I say this too, actually, I do want to talk a little bit about, in the doctor's opinion, just like an interesting thing that I've come across like since being at medical school. In the doctor's opinion, they're getting letters from Silkworth, and he's writing basically like way back in time, like about alcoholism as a disease, and like basically like what's the best way to go about like treating these patients, right? And I heard like I think I read it somewhere, but there was like a thing like when Silkworth was writing these letters, Roland Hazard was communicating with Silkworth, kind of saying like, hey, we need letters for the doctor's opinion because like we need like a physician's input about this disease before we go and publish this book, right? They're trying to get evidence from these doctors. And Silkworth and Carl Jung, they're very well-known physicians back in the day. And Silkworth had this idea that he told Roland Hazard. He said he just has this like instinctual idea that the alcoholic's longing for a drink or longing for a drug is actually not a longing for a drink, it's a longing for connection. And when I'm in medical school and we're learning about like different kinds of addictions and, alcoholism, it's just crazy to me because like they're still teaching people that the best way to help alcoholics and to cure alcoholics is by spiritual intervention, by 12-step intervention, by sending struggling people here to get the help they need. Because, despite all the scientific innovation that we have, despite all the surgeries that we have, all the amazing things that we can do, we still, this is still the best way to treat alcoholism. And I just think that that's crazy to me. And I think that it's just super cool that, these institutions are still, and I agree with it, they're still, pushing out this idea that, send them to AA because that's where they're going to get better. Last thing I want to talk about is page 45. It says, lack of power, that was our dilemma. And then it says, and very talking about the important things, well, that's exactly what this book is about. Its main objective is to enable you to find a power greater than yourself, which will solve your problem. And I just think this is a very important key takeaway, because it's telling you what this whole process is about. It's telling you that it's about finding a power greater than yourself that can take away your problems. And it's talking about the lack of power being the dilemma. It's not saying lack of faith, right? Because if it was lack of faith, we wouldn't have priests coming in here trying to get sober. It's not saying lack of knowledge. It's not saying lack of, not having the big book memorized. It's saying lack of power. That was our dilemma. And it's been my experience that this has been a very subtractive process. I feel like I get the most out of the program when I'm actively subtracting things from my life, which is clearing away that blockage so I can be connected with a power greater than myself. And I think that sometimes I think that conferences like these can kind of be misleading, because you have people come up here and you have people speak, but really what that does sometimes is it kind of mistakes this process for being more of an academic process. It mistakes this process for being book heavy and for being knowledge about the book and knowledge about the program. And I don't think that this is an academic process. I think this is an experiential process. And I hope that I shared my experience tonight, because I feel like that is the most important thing about this program, in my opinion, is my experience about how AA has changed my life, and about how I use AA in my day-to-day life to get through things, the friends that I've made in here and stuff like that. So, with that being said, I have no idea how long I talked for, because honestly, I forgot to start my timer. I was really nervous. And I'm very grateful to be in Alcoholics Anonymous. It's, in every aspect, this is not the same 5 years ago. This is not the same person at all. I'm a totally different person than I was, and this program has literally given me everything. And I just want to make sure that I keep saying yes to things like this, and I want to make sure that I keep giving back to the new guy, because I know that when I came in, there were people that helped me out. And one last thing too that I'll say is if you're young in here, if you're trying to get sober and you're young, don't be afraid. There's definitely it's hard, but there's ways to still have fun. There's ways to get through it, and there's it's just been my experience that I've had so much fun being sober young. And I celebrated my 21st birthday sober. So if you're young in here and you're struggling, please don't be shy. Come talk to me after the meeting, because I have a lot of experience with that. But yeah, thank you so much for hearing me talk tonight.